When I walked into the courtroom, my daughter laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a confused one. It was sharp, cold, almost relieved. And my son-in-law, the man I once trusted like my own son, didn't even look at me. That was the moment I knew. Whatever story they had told the world about me had already been believed. I stood there alone, holding my worn coat tight around my hands, listening to whispers echo through the room. People looked at me like they already knew my ending. Like I was guilty of something I didn't even understand yet. The judge hadn't spoken. The lawyers hadn't started. But my sentence had already been written on my daughter's face. I raised her alone. I gave her everything I had. And now, she was smiling while my life was about to fall apart. It didn't start here. It never does. It started years earlier, on a quiet morning, when I first realized I was becoming invisible in my own family. After my wife died, the house felt too big, too quiet. Every sound reminded me of her absence. My daughter, Emily, was my only reason to keep going. She was young, bright, and full of dreams. I worked long hours at a small construction company, just to make sure she never felt the weight I carried. I missed birthdays. I missed school events, but I never missed loving her. When she met Daniel, I was cautious. He was charming, educated, and spoke with confidence. He shook my hand firmly, looked me in the eye, and said he would take care of my daughter. I wanted to believe him. Maybe I needed to believe him. They got married quickly, too quickly. Emily moved out and suddenly the house was quiet again. At first, they visited often, then less, then almost never. When I did see them, things felt off. Emily interrupted me when I spoke. Daniel answered questions meant for her. Small things, easy to ignore, so I did. Until the day Emily asked me to sign some papers. She said it was just for helping them with a loan. She smiled sweetly, called me Dad the way she used to. I trusted her. I didn't read every word. That mistake would cost me everything. Months later, I got a letter saying I was being sued. Fraud, financial manipulation, elder abuse. The words didn't make sense. I laughed at first. I thought it was a mistake. Then I called Emily. She didn't answer. I called Daniel. Straight to voicemail. The next letter came from a lawyer. They claimed I had stolen money, that I had pressured them, that I had signed documents knowingly and maliciously. I went to their house. Daniel opened the door just enough to block the view inside. Emily didn't come out. "You need to leave," he said. "I asked to see my daughter. She doesn't want to talk to you," he replied, without emotion. That was the first night I didn't sleep. Everything moved fast after that, faster than I could understand. My accounts were frozen. My job suspended me pending investigation. Friends stopped calling. People believe what's written on paper more than what's written on a lifetime of love. And then came the trial. The courtroom smelled like old wood and cold air. My lawyer spoke in careful words, but I could feel how weak my case sounded compared to theirs. They had documents, statements, witnesses. They had my daughter. When Emily took the stand, she didn't look at me. She talked about fear, about manipulation, about feeling controlled. Every sentence felt like a knife, not because it hurt my reputation, but because it hurt my memory. I remembered holding her when she cried as a child. I remembered working double shifts to pay for her college. I remembered promising her mother I would always protect her. And now she was saying I was the one who hurt her. That's when she laughed, just for a second. But I saw it, and Daniel looked away. Something inside me broke quietly, not into anger, into silence. I realized something in that moment. They didn't need me anymore. And they needed me to fall. The judge ordered a break. I sat alone on a bench in the hallway. No one sat beside me. No one asked if I was okay. I stared at the floor and asked myself one question. How did I raise someone who could do this? The answer didn't come that day, or the next. But what came instead was patience. The trial continued for weeks. I lost almost everything. My savings, my reputation. The house I lived in for 30 years was seized pending outcome. I moved into a small rented room. One window, one bed, one table. At night I replayed every moment of Emily's childhood, searching for the moment I failed. But slowly, another thought started to grow. What if this wasn't the whole truth? I asked my lawyer to request every document again, every signature, every timeline. And that's when something didn't line up. Dates were off, signatures were scanned. One document was notarized on a day I was proven to be out of state for work. Small cracks. But cracks can break walls. I spent months digging, teaching myself how to read legal language, learning how digital signatures work, learning how lies hide in details. Everyone thought I was defeated. That was my advantage. One night, while reviewing emails provided by the court, I found one message that changed everything. It wasn't from Emily. It was from Daniel, sent to a financial advisor. In it he wrote, "Once the old man is legally blamed, everything transfers cleanly." Old man. That's what I was to him. Not a father, not family, just an obstacle. I handed the email to my lawyer with shaking hands. For the first time, he looked at me differently. The next hearing felt different. This time, when Daniel took the stand, the questions changed. He hesitated. Emily looked confused. The email was read out loud. The courtroom went silent. Daniel tried to explain. Said it was taken out of context. Said it was a joke. But jokes don't include bank routing numbers. The judge ordered a deeper investigation. Days turned into weeks again. This time, the whispers were different. Emily started avoiding my eyes. One afternoon, she approached me in the hallway. Her smile was gone. "Dad, why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. I looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not doing anything to you," I said. "I'm just telling the truth." She didn't respond. When the final ruling came, it didn't end with shouting or celebration. Daniel was found guilty of fraud and manipulation. The documents were forged. The story was planned. Emily wasn't innocent, but she wasn't the mastermind. She had believed him. The judge cleared my name, but freedom doesn't always feel like victory. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked questions I didn't answer. Emily stood a few feet away, crying. Daniel was taken away in handcuffs. She finally looked at me, not as an enemy, not as a victim, but as a daughter who had lost her way. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I wanted to hug her, to tell her everything would be okay, but some wounds need time before touch. "I love you," I said. "But love doesn't erase truth." She nodded through tears. We didn't leave together. That came later. Months later. Healing is slower than pain. Today, I live simply. I work part-time. I drink my coffee slowly in the morning. Some days are still heavy. Emily calls now. Not often, but honestly. Trust isn't rebuilt by words. It's rebuilt by patience. When I think back to that first day in the courtroom, I no longer remember the laughter. I remember the lesson. Sometimes the people closest to you will misunderstand you. Sometimes they will hurt you deeply. But silence, patience, and truth have a quiet power. You don't need to destroy anyone to win. You just need to stand long enough for the truth to catch up. And when it does, it doesn't shout. It simply stays. Months passed, and life became quieter. I moved into a small apartment near the park, where the mornings were empty but peaceful. I would sit on the bench, watch people jogging, kids playing, couples walking hand in hand, and wonder how quickly trust could be twisted into betrayal. Sometimes I thought about Emily. Sometimes I thought about Daniel. But more often, I thought about myself, the man who had loved, who had been fooled, who had almost given up entirely. One rainy afternoon, as I walked home from work, I saw Emily standing under the awning of a coffee shop, holding a small box. She looked older than I remembered, fragile in a way that only someone carrying regret can appear. She saw me, hesitated, then stepped forward. I don't know where to start," she said, voice trembling. I didn't understand anything back then. I just followed him. I nodded slowly, letting her words sink. There was no anger in me anymore. Only the deep exhaustion of a man who had survived the storm. "I know," I said quietly. "But understanding comes with time. And now we can start again." She handed me the box. Inside, it was a collection of letters she had written, but never sent, confessions, apologies, memories of childhood, and realizations about Daniel. Some of them made me ache, others made me smile. We sat on the bench in the park for hours. No judgments, no recriminations. Just two people, father and daughter, trying to bridge a gap that had nearly swallowed us both. Slowly, she began to trust herself. Slowly, She began to see the world as it really was. Slowly, we began to trust each other again. Life never returns to what it was before a betrayal. The cracks remain, but those cracks become the spaces where truth, patience, and resilience grow. Daniel was sentenced to years in prison, but that never mattered to me. Revenge in the way I had imagined it in my darkest nights would have brought no peace. The only victory worth having was surviving intact, without losing my heart or my values. I started volunteering at a local community center, teaching financial literacy to young adults. Many had families like mine, broken, fragile, unsure of who to trust. Sharing my story became my way of turning pain into purpose. Every smile I saw in those young faces reminded me that life is bigger than one person's betrayal. Emily began visiting often. She brought coffee sometimes. Other times, she just walked beside me in silence. No rush, no pressure, just presence. And slowly, the laughter that once cut me like a knife returned, softer, warmer, filled with recognition and love rather than mockery. One day, sitting by the window with sunlight spilling across the table, she asked me something I had never expected. "Dade, did you ever hate me?" I looked at her, really looked at her, the girl who had once betrayed and then been betrayed herself. "No," I said firmly. "I was hurt. I was angry. But hate destroys the one who holds it. I chose not to be destroyed." Her eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of relief, recognition, love. Years went on. I grew older. My hair grayed, my steps slowed, but I carried a calm I had never known before. Pain had been my teacher. Betrayal had been my test. Patience had been my secret weapon. And in the quiet moments, I felt a kind of happiness I had never expected, freedom from the need to control, the need to punish, the need to be understood. The lesson I carry, and the lesson I hope anyone listening carries too, is this: life will test you. People will betray you. Sometimes the ones you love the most will fail you. But there is power in endurance, in keeping your heart open despite the hurt. There is strength in patience, and there is peace in truth. And when the storm finally clears, when the courtroom is empty, when the laughter fades and the tears settle, you realize something profound: survival isn't about defeating others. Survival is about keeping your own soul intact. Emily and I never returned to the old ways. We never rebuilt what had been broken completely, but we built something new, something stronger, quieter, real. The courtroom, the lies, the betrayal, all of it is behind me now. But the memory remains, a reminder of how fragile trust can be and how enduring patience can be. And sometimes, when I sit quietly at night, I can hear that first laugh. I can see Daniel looking away, and I smile, not with revenge, not with anger, but with understanding. Because the most powerful thing in the world isn't anger, or hatred, or retribution. The most powerful thing is truth. And the most lasting revenge is living well, with dignity, with love, and with the courage to let the world see you as you really are. The next few months were quiet but heavy. I spent mornings alone in my small apartment, sipping black coffee and staring at the street below. Sometimes I would hear laughter from children playing nearby, and it would pierce through the gray weight in my chest. Memories of Emily as a little girl flashed, her tiny hands holding mine, her scraped knees, her innocent trust in me. I clutched at those memories because they were the only pieces of the past I could rely on. Emily started visiting more regularly, though the tension between us remained like a thread stretched too thin. She would sit across from me at the kitchen table, arms wrapped around herself, hesitant to speak. Her eyes told me everything: regret, fear, guilt, confusion. But slowly, she started talking. "I didn't know who I was anymore," she whispered one afternoon. I didn't want to believe I had been wrong. About him, about you, about everything." I listened quietly. My voice stayed calm, steady. "You were a child," I said softly. "And sometimes children make mistakes. Adults sometimes do too. The difference is, we learn from them." She nodded, tears falling silently. That was all I needed for the moment. No apologies. No explanations. Just acknowledgement. Meanwhile, the courtroom drama continued in the background. Daniel's legal team tried every trick imaginable to buy time, intimidate witnesses, and twist evidence. I watched it all unfold from afar, mostly through my lawyer. I stayed removed, letting the truth work its slow, patient way. One night, I went through my old journals. Each page was filled with memories of Emily, calculations of mistakes, lists of injustices I had endured. I realized something I hadn't faced before. The anger I had carried had been like a living thing, eating at me. I had been so focused on proving my innocence that I almost lost myself in the process. That night, I made a choice. I would fight, yes, but not with anger. I would fight with patience, with clarity, and with truth. In court, the tension reached a breaking point. The judge was visibly frustrated with Daniel's team for repeatedly submitting falsified documents. Emily's testimony began to falter under scrutiny as inconsistencies appeared. She looked at me for the first time during a cross-examination, and her eyes were full of fear. I didn't respond with judgment. I simply held her gaze, steady, letting her know I wasn't against her. Then came the evidence that would turn everything around. It was a small document, buried deep within a pile of digital files, a notarized agreement Daniel had forged, backdated to make it appear I had signed it willingly. My lawyer presented it with careful precision, and the courtroom went silent. Emily gasped. Daniel's confident smile wavered. The judge read the document slowly, each word like a hammer striking the weight of truth into the room. Daniel tried to explain, to twist the narrative, but the proof was undeniable. He had underestimated patience, and the quiet determination of someone who had nothing left to lose but their dignity. After hours of deliberation, the verdict was announced. Daniel was found guilty of fraud, forgery, and manipulation. My name was cleared completely. Emily ran to me after the verdict, tears streaming down her face. She wrapped her arms around me, and for the first time in months, I felt the warmth I had feared was gone forever. "I'm so sorry," she whispered into my shoulder. I was blind. I was scared. I didn't know how to see the truth. I held her tight. "It's over," I said gently. "The past is behind us. Now, it's time to move forward." Over the next year, we slowly rebuilt our relationship. It wasn't instant. Trust doesn't return like a faucet you can turn on. It's like a garden, growing slowly, needing care, patience, and sunlight. Emily and I began spending weekends together. We talked about her dreams, my fears, and the lessons we had both learned. I also found purpose beyond myself. I began volunteering at a local community center, teaching young adults how to protect themselves financially, how to read contracts, how to recognize manipulation. Every student I saw reminded me of Emily, vulnerable, impressionable, capable of great love but also of being missiled. Sharing my story became my way of transforming pain into guidance. One evening, Emily and I sat on the porch of my small apartment. The sun was setting, painting the sky in warm colors. She reached out, touched my hand, and smiled softly. "Dad," she said, "I don't want to lose this again. I don't want to lose us." "You won't," I replied. "Not if we keep being honest, patient, and mindful. Not if we let truth guide us instead of fear." And in that moment, I realized the full meaning of what I had endured. Betrayal could break hearts, ruin reputations, and twist lives. But the real victory wasn't in revenge. The real victory was surviving with your integrity intact, holding on to the truth, and allowing love, even fractured and tested, to return. Years passed. Emily grew into a strong, thoughtful woman, carrying lessons from her own mistakes and from the pain we had both endured. She called often, sometimes to talk, sometimes just to hear my voice. I grew older. My hair turned silver. My hands bore the marks of decades of work and worry. But there was a peace I had never known in my younger years, a calm that came from surviving the storm, from facing betrayal, and from knowing that truth, patience, and love could endure even the darkest nights. I often walk alone through the park now, remembering the early days when I thought I had lost everything. But loss is relative. I may have lost comfort, certainty, and trust, but I never lost myself. And in the end, that was more than enough. Sometimes, when I sit quietly at night, I remember that first courtroom moment. Emily's laugh, Daniel looking away. I don't feel anger anymore. I feel clarity. I feel strength. Life will always test you. People will hurt you. Sometimes, the ones you love most will deceive you. but standing firm in patience, truth, and love. That is how a person survives, how a heart heals, and how a life finds meaning again. And that is the story I live by. Because vengeance fades, anger fades, even sorrow eventually fades, but truth and integrity, they last forever. And in the end, that is more powerful than anything else in the world. The months after the verdict were quiet but far from easy. Emily and I had started rebuilding trust, slowly, like walking on a frozen lake, unsure which patches could hold our weight. She still flinched when I raised my voice, still hesitated before calling me Dad, and I still checked myself before speaking, making sure my words carried patience instead of judgment. Daniel was in prison, but his shadow lingered. Every time Emily received a text from someone connected to him, she would pause, reading with a mix of fear and anxiety, and I could see the guilt in her eyes, not for what she had done, but for the lies she had allowed herself to believe. One evening, Emily came over with a small stack of notebooks. "Date I've been writing," she said quietly, sliding them across the table. "Everything I remember, everything I felt. I want to understand it all before I forget it." I nodded. "That's a good start. Writing helps you see yourself." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever think about forgiving him?" I paused. My mind went to the first day in court, Daniel smiling, confident, untouchable. I remembered the email that had exposed him, the months of quiet investigation, the painstaking patience it had taken to finally see justice done. "I don't need to forgive him," I said carefully. "I only need to live my life without letting him control my heart anymore." She nodded slowly, relief washing over her face. Over the next few weeks, I noticed a subtle change in her. She started asking questions, not accusations, but questions about life, responsibility, and trust. "How do you know when to let go?" she asked one evening, staring out the window at the city lights. I smiled. "You let go when holding on only keeps you in pain. You let go when you realize some things are not yours to carry." Meanwhile, the trial's aftermath continued to ripple through our lives. Daniel's former business partners were now under investigation, and some of the witnesses who had supported his lies were quietly retracting statements. The truth, slow and deliberate, was changing the world around us. One day, Emily came rushing into my apartment, eyes wide. "Dad, you won't believe this. Someone found more proof of his fraud. They're reopening cases. People are paying for what they did to us." I felt a pang of satisfaction but pushed it aside. Satisfaction wasn't my goal anymore. Survival was. Integrity was. I remember sitting in the park that evening, Emily beside me silent. The breeze carried the faint scent of rain. I thought about the first time I had walked through that courtroom, laughed at by my own daughter, ignored by the man I trusted. I thought about every sleepless night, every moment of despair, every small victory I had quietly fought for. "Dade, I think I understand now," Emily said softly. "I see what you mean about patience, about truth. It's not instant, is it?" "No," I replied. "It's never instant. But it's stronger than any anger, any revenge, any fear." We sat in silence, letting the lesson sink in. Months later, I began to see Emily grow in ways I hadn't expected. She started helping me with my volunteer work at the community center, speaking to young people about financial responsibility, trust, and resilience. She told them stories, not of her failures, but of lessons learned the hard way, and in those moments, I saw her strength emerge. Daniel's shadow finally disappeared one winter afternoon. He was moved to a lower security facility, and the court cases connected to his fraud were resolved. His power over us, over my life, completely vanished. Yet, freedom didn't feel triumphant. Not in the way people imagine. It felt quiet, subtle, like the first calm after a storm. Emily and I no longer needed to speak about the past constantly. It had been acknowledged, confronted, survived. The court's verdict didn't just clear my name, it cleared our hearts, allowing us to rebuild without the weight of lies. One evening, I found myself walking alone down the city streets, lights reflecting on wet pavement. I thought about everything I had endured: betrayal, humiliation, fear, and I realized the most powerful thing I had gained wasn't money, proof, or vindication. It was understanding. Understanding that people will fail you. understanding that patience is stronger than rage, understanding that life is not about destroying those who hurt you, but about keeping your soul intact while the world tests you. Emily caught up with me, her scarf fluttering in the cold wind. "Dad, you okay?" she asked. I smiled. "Yes, I'm better than okay. I'm free." She linked her arm with mine. "Me too," she said. And for the first time in years, the weight I had carried of lies, betrayal, fear, felt lighter. We walked together, not as a father and a daughter torn apart by deceit, but as two survivors who had learned the hardest lesson of all. That life doesn't always go as planned, but the strength of your heart determines whether you survive or collapse. And in the quiet that evening, with city lights flickering and the wind at our backs, I knew one final truth. The most lasting revenge is not to hurt those who have wronged you, but to live fully, truthfully, and with patience. Because in the end, surviving with your dignity and your heart intact is more powerful than anything else in the world. And that is the story I live by.